heading to their office jobs in the city, and they came home on the train at the same time, and we all sat down to dinner at the same time, and I think pretty well we ate the same thing every night. I'm exaggerating, of course, but in fact, that was my recollection of the lack of diversity in my hometown. Let me tell you a little bit about the Greater Toronto Area today. I'll use the most recent census as well as our own research to highlight some of the remarkable attributes of the Greater Toronto Area. It is, in fact, the single most diverse region in the world ethnoculturally. We have about 2.5 million people that live in the city of Toronto and another 3 million that live in the surrounding area for a total of 5.5 million people in population. But the real story is about the change and the diversity within that population. Canada has the highest immigration rate in the world. With a population of 32 million, we accept 250,000 immigrants into our country every year. But the plurality of these newcomers who come to the Greater Toronto Area specifically is incredible. 100,000 new immigrants come to Toronto every year. In fact, 1 in 2 of these new immigrants come to the YMCA within their first 3 to 6 months in the country. We provide a range of information and referral services as well as language assessment for new Canadians. 1 in 4 of the residents in the Greater Toronto Area, in fact more than 1 in 4, were born outside of Canada. Soon that number will be more than half. Incidentally, of the employees of our YMCA, 50% were born in another country. And when I say our immigrants come from all over the world, it's not a cliche from a brochure at City Hall. In fact, plenty of cities across, especially in North America, have large immigrant populations. But Toronto's immigrants are the most internationally diverse on earth. One interesting way of looking at this is to look at the number of ethnic populations or nationalities with more than 1% of the city's population. In Toronto, in many cities, there are 3 or 4 or 5 groups that have more than 1% of the population. In Toronto, we have 14 groups like this. They're from China, India, the United Kingdom, Italy, the Philippines, Jamaica, Portugal, Poland, Sri Lanka, Guyana, the former USSR, Vietnam, Pakistan, and the former Yugoslavia. These 14 foreign-born groups in Toronto that make up 1% of the population or greater share very little beyond their immigrant experience. They speak different languages and hail from Latin America, Western Europe, East Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, and the Caribbean, literally all over the world. And I'm speaking about just the largest groups. In fact, there are many, many others, countless smaller communities, over 100 different languages spoken in homes throughout our region. Toronto is far from being the biggest city in the world, but it's home to the world's most extensive, it's home to the most extensive collection of the world's citizens. In fact, in this respect, Toronto contains more of the world than New York or Tokyo or Lagos or Mexico City. We also have other dimensions of diversity that mark our city. The Greater Toronto Area is aging, as most cities in the Western world are. The definition of the family has been rapidly changing. In fact, the nuclear family that I grew up in my hometown is in fact less common than same-sex couples with children, extended families who live together, families with older children, single-parent families, just a few examples of this changing definition. The Greater Toronto Area is home to the 3rd largest, let me get this right, LGBTQI population. That's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, two-spirited, queer, questioning, and intersex, the 3rd largest in North America. There'll be a quiz on that at the end of the session. The majority of the population of the city of Toronto will be people of color within the next 10 years. Right now, it's about 46%. Unfortunately, in the area of income, we also have some diversity, some of which is not what we would like it to be. Over 1 million people in the Greater Toronto Area, more than 1 in 5, live below the low-income cutoff threshold. In fact, unfortunately, Toronto has been called the poverty capital of Canada. We have some real issues that we have to address about the people who have and many of the people who have not. For the most part, Canadians are very pleased with all of this diversity. International polls find that Canadians tend to be the most enthusiastic about immigration of any society on earth. In fact, there are only two countries where immigrants go that think that immigration is a good thing, where the majority of people think that. The U.S. is the other country. 52% of the population believe that immigration is a good thing. In Canada, it's 78% of the population believe that immigration is good for Canada. Canadians, in fact, say that multiculturalism, our national policy framework for approaching diversity, makes them proud to be Canadian. In fact, in the most recent survey, and you won't believe this, more people think that multiculturalism is what makes them proud about Canadians than hockey. Bit of a surprising statistic, but that tells you how important this is to us. So you've probably figured out by now that I'm a long way away from the street where I grew up. The street where, at one point, a young boy, a friend of mine, pulled me aside and pointed to a house and said, "Jews live there." I can remember at the time not knowing what that meant, but I did detect from the way he said it that there was something wrong with the people who lived in that house. If that boy arrived in my community today with the same sheltered and suspicious outlook, he would have a hard time figuring out where to point that exclusionary finger. Though meeting the challenge of diversity and social inclusion in our community is an ongoing project, and it's a long way from completion, I can honestly say that at this point in our region's history, diversity is seen as normal. At our YMCA in particular, we're striving to create an atmosphere where instead of people pointing when they see a face that's different than theirs, they point when they don't see faces different from theirs, and they ask who's not there and why aren't they there? Why aren't they here? So let me tell you a little bit about our YMCA. With an annual operating budget of $155 million, the YMCA of Greater Toronto is Canada's 7th largest charity, working with close to 425,000 members of all backgrounds and abilities every year in over 235 locations around the Greater Toronto area. We offer a wide range of programs and services. Most of you know the why. If I did this, you could probably recite after me. Best advertising we never paid for. But we do a lot of things beyond our health, fitness, and recreation programs. Childcare, camping and outdoor education, education and essential skills development, employment programs, family support programs, international programs, programs to welcome newcomers, youth in need of housing, and youth outreach and interventions. Many other things in addition to our health, fitness, and recreation work, of which we are very proud. We employ over 3,000 staff members, over 4,000 volunteers, and over 12,000 donors. We provide direct financial assistance to about 35,000 people every year who cannot afford to participate otherwise, and through our partnership with governments, we also provide access to over 250,000 people in need. So our YMCA, given the size and scope and focus that we have, has had to really address the issue of diversity and social inclusion head on. And as part of this effort, we've done a lot of research over the last couple of years. In the course of this research, in addition to asking people what they thought of the YMCA, we also asked them to talk about their community and identify some of the important issues facing the Greater Toronto Area. Remarkably, in the most diverse city in the world, very, very few respondents pointed to ethnic tensions as a central community issue. We did find, however, that while people were enthusiastic about living in a diverse society, they didn't feel they were getting all they could about from the richness that surrounded them. We asked people whether they were more interested in belonging to organizations that let them be with people who were like them, or to organizations that let them get to know people who were different from them. Across all ethnocultural groups, majorities told us that they were interested in reaching out to people who were different than themselves. We also asked people in focus groups whether they had had enough opportunities to engage in the diversity around them. And they actually said no. They said while they were if they were on the subway or walking down Yonge Street, which is our main street in Toronto, They saw the diversity around them, but they didn't have enough chances to really reach out to those people that are different than themselves and get to know them. Here's what a woman from Pakistan in her 60s said to us. When everyone is segregated within their own culture, it defeats the purpose of a truly multicultural city. Later on, she told us she was embarrassed to have lived in Toronto for over 20 years without having picked up Italian. Norberto, she felt badly because while her English was flawless, she hadn't become versed in the languages of some other important immigrant groups. So people were telling us through our research that they wanted chances to bridge social capital. Sociologists, I think Robert Putnam coined the term, describe social capital as the networks between people, and especially the atmosphere of basic trust that comes from casual ties, or what he called loose ties. If you wouldn't think to count your change after leaving your corner store or your dépanneur, because you've seen the same shopkeeper every day over the years, there's some social capital between you. Capital that might keep you from going to another store, or that might even get you to help jumpstart the owner of the store's car, or help her lift a heavy box. It's familiarity and goodwill. You don't even have to know each other's names. In our research, people were telling us they wanted the chance to bridge social capital, to connect with people different than themselves. They wanted chances to interact casually with people and develop trust, even friendship with them. And they wanted the YMCA as a community-serving organization, and I believe other organizations that provide leisure services, to facilitate this coming together of neighbors who didn't want to be strangers anymore. So let me talk a little bit about the role of leisure. And I'll do this by describing a few of the programs that I mentioned earlier and tell you a couple of stories about them. One of them is our newcomer program, where we serve nearly 50% of all the newcomers to the Greater Toronto Area every year. One of the new programs we've introduced is a Leader Corps. YMCA Leader Corps is one of the oldest programs we offer, a Leader Corps for newcomer youth. If you can imagine this, these are kids who've been in the country for 3-4 weeks. You think about my own children when they went from elementary school to high school and the kind of nervousness they had about meeting new friends and would they be accepted and so on. Can you imagine what it's like to come from the other side of the world and try to integrate into a new community? Well, we brought those young people together so that their very first Canadian experience is to become a YMCA leader, to learn about leadership skills and to serve others. I actually attended a session of the newcomer Leader Corps. They all speak different languages, lots of smiling and nodding, no simultaneous translation, but they get by somehow. And they were, as their first project, they were going to host a group of youth from the YMCA of Spain. So we had 40 young people from Spain, speaking pretty well only Spanish, and 40 young people from all over the world, and they led each other on a tour of the city of Toronto. I mean, talk about the blind leading the blind. They had no idea where they were going, but they had a great time together, and they were able to share their new experience. I should also mention, in terms of the Leader Corps, that we introduced a Leader Corps for the same group I mentioned earlier, LGBTQI. If you can imagine a group of young people who are more isolated and indeed more persecuted than young people with a different sexual orientation, many of whom have just discovered their difference. We set up a Leader Corps for those kids and called for volunteers to work with them. I had 19 of our full-time staff step up and say they would volunteer to help with these young people. To tell you even a more important story about that in terms of how our organization has grown, where that would have been a controversial topic even 10 years ago, now no one asked me for permission as the CEO. No one came and said, can we have this group? They just set it up to serve those young people. Second program area is childcare. We are the largest provider of licensed childcare. We're over 180 childcare centers around the area. We use a curriculum called YMCA Playing to Learn, which uses play as an opportunity to teach children about skills, values like inclusiveness, respect for each other, responsibility, honesty, and caring, and provides support to families. One of the programs that we've introduced is an opportunity to provide subsidized access to these programs, subsidized recreation for children and youth who come from low-income families. We were offering it, actually was part of a study with McMaster University, opportunities for single moms on social assistance to put their children in programs offered by 29 different organizations as a way to come to grips with their own situation. The research actually proved that when you do provide subsidized recreation, the child's situation improves, mom's situation improves, and twice as many of the moms get off social assistance within 1 year than when we don't provide that access to recreation programs. One of the children identified in the intake process that she would like to get involved in drama. And we gave her an opportunity to enter the drama program at the local Living Arts Theatre. And at the end of that year, at the Hamilton Place, this was in Hamilton, Ontario, this young child was the Sugar Plum Fairy at the Nutcracker Suite. So access to recreation, bridging that diversity between income levels is also very important. We also offer camping programs, and I know the camping conference is going on at the same time as the World Leisure Congress. We have programs which offer children the opportunity to learn to appreciate the outdoors in a fun and values-driven environment, and teens and young adults to develop leadership skills that will last them a lifetime. We have our health, fitness, and recreation programs, which probably are the best-known programs to all of you that the YMCA offers. And these bring people together of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities to participate in sports and recreation and physical activity to improve their health and also develop a sense of belonging and community. One of the stories that one of my staff tells is that during the 90s, when the Iraq-Iran war was going on, in our Metro Central Y in downtown Toronto, we had a volleyball team between the members of our Y who were of Iraqi descent and the members of our Y who were of Iranian descent. It was a peaceful, although probably competitive game of volleyball, but a very positive way in which those diversities could interact. So what role does leisure play in social integration and or disintegration? From our research and our experience, leisure provides an opportunity to build self-esteem, to create a sense of belonging, to maintain friendships and relationships, to reduce social isolation, to learn about new ways of life and new customs, to create a public place, a very important thing today, a safe public space for community involvement, and to promote plurality, cultural interaction, and integration in the community. In fact, many of our centers have membership bases of somewhere between 10 and 15,000 people. This is as large as many of the small towns that make up our country of Canada. But these towns have something special about them. They're towns in which everybody has agreed that they want to come together to live a healthier lifestyle and to help each other build a community based on positive social values and that brings people together from all walks of life. So, how do experiences in leisure facilitate a sense of belonging to the community? And let me share the newcomer experience as we've heard it from the many people that we serve. Some of the newcomers, in their own words, have told us that leisure is a perfect means to feel whether the society you live in is inclusive or not. They talk about how happy it makes people feel when somebody in the group smiles at them and welcomes them to join the team. They tell us that leisure can foster a sense of belonging. When you get involved in community festivals and other leisure activities, these activities give you an opportunity to share with the mainstream society that you become part of. And they play the role of integrator for new arrivals. In the case of immigrants to Canada, it's useful to consider that while they are looking for networking in order to obtain decent employment, that's the very first challenge, and unfortunately sometimes takes far too long. They also need leisure. They also can use leisure as an opportunity to create those networks. They've told us that leisure activity is the perfect time to stimulate solidarity, especially when there's opportunities for people to use that leisure time to exchange the stories and history of their culture, their countries, their generations, their communities, and the groups to which they belong. When people have an opportunity to share their feelings, their experiences, their concerns, and it gives them a chance to recognize the diversity amongst us, but also build a feeling of solidarity within people from those diverse areas. Now, there are some problems, issues, and threats associated with this. It's not all good news. I think that Toronto is in the midst of one of the world's great social experiments, and I think that we are so far succeeding. But there are some real challenges, both within our society and within our organization, that we need to continue to address. One of them is that one of the issues we experience at our YMCA and in our community is the balance between the need for social integration and the need to preserve ethnic, national, religious, and or gender identities. This is an ongoing challenge, and the way that we've approached it, because we're constantly in a situation of having to make a judgment call about the good of the collective of people who are coming to the YMCA, basically the solidarity side, and the individuals that are seeking services, the identity side. We use a number of principles to guide our decision making. First of all is the health and safety of the individuals and groups that are coming to our Y. We put that first and foremost. Secondly, the respect for the law. We make sure that we respect the legislation that guides our work. And adherence to the Human Rights Code. Here in Canada, we have a strong Human Rights Code that helps us guide our decision making. An adherence to our organization's own values. And one of the things that is quite challenging is to actually revisit those values when you're confronted with some dramatic difference in the person you're trying to serve. And finally, we use a respect for the sustainability of the community. Will the decision we make allow this community we're serving and the community within the YMCA to thrive? We do experience some cultural competition that occurs particularly within our health, fitness, and recreation centers. It can sometimes lead to conflict between groups or result in increased understanding, depending on how well our staff manage this. We've also experienced issues of horizontal discrimination from one minority group to another minority group. These situations often place undue strain and stress on the capacity of our staff, and as a result, as part of our Diversity and Social Inclusion Initiative, we've introduced a very comprehensive training program for staff and also have provided some support and counseling for our staff as incidents and issues occur. All of this change is extremely fast-paced, and as in all of your organizations, we do, even though we are a large organization, we have limited space and capacity. And so the ability to program and provide access to leisure activities for all the groups who would like to come to our YMCA is sometimes strained. In fact, we've often had to make some trade-offs between some of our traditional programming. I hate to tell you, but floor hockey in the gymnasium at the Brampton YMCA has been replaced by indoor cricket. I shouldn't say I hate to tell you that. I guess that's my Canadian heritage coming out. But in fact, it's a very positive thing for the community because there's a lot more people in Brampton who want to play cricket. The tension that's created when the right to express identity interferes with a sense of community. So the individual versus the group, which has always been a challenge for leisure organizations offering leisure programs, but becomes an even bigger challenge in the midst of significant diversity. So where to from here? We believe that in focusing on a diversity and social inclusion approach, and also on our values, our mission, and our vision, could solve many of the problems created by a sense of social isolation and help to lever the potential richness that comes from diversity. In fact, what we think we're talking about at the end of the day is the concept of unity. What this conference, I think, talks about as solidarity. This idea of bridging social capital, ties forged across lines of race, religion, or even language. When you develop any relationship of trust, however casual, With someone different from you, you're building up a little bridging of social capital. And leisure can be a method to achieve this unity while preserving individual identity. In our research, as I've mentioned, people were telling us they wanted chances to interact casually with people different from themselves and develop trust and friendship with them. And they wanted the YMCA to facilitate this coming together of neighbors who didn't want to be strangers anymore. If you go back in our history, in the 19th and much of the 20th century, our YMCA was an organization that focused on social bonding, another concept introduced by Robert Putnam. In our history, we brought together young Christian men. Today, however, while young Christian men are always welcome, and so are middle-aged Muslim women from Pakistan, like the one I mentioned earlier, and a host of others in between. We have become a bridging organization, one that brings together all the diverse elements of our community, whether they're seeking employment counseling, childcare, settlement services, or just a pickup basketball game. Our mission, our vision, and our values as a YMCA demand us to do this work. In fact, we think as a charity, one of the most important jobs we have today is to create a place where everyone can connect with others. Our community needs us to fulfill this role. In a community as diverse as ours, if it's going to work harmoniously, it's going to need a lot of bridging. Let me tell you just a quick story to conclude about, Just to conclude, a quick story about my own experience. I've recently hired a new chief development officer, basically the person in charge of fundraising at our YMCA. And I made the judgment when I knew that we were going to have this position open that, in fact, there's no diversity in the field of fundraising, and therefore I should just hire someone who I already knew. I was at an event, and my board chair and my past chair suggested that we go out for a beer afterwards so that they can talk with me. That's a bit of a scary proposition when they gang up on you like that. So I accepted the invitation. We went out, and they said, we know that it's your job to do the hiring, but we want to remind you that our organization has a commitment to diversity and social inclusion. And even though the field may be fairly homogeneous today, we want you to work hard at trying to find a diverse pool of candidates who are well qualified for the position. I'm happy to say that with a little effort, we ended up with a final group of 6 candidates, all of whom were extraordinary fundraisers. 2 of them from the US, 4 of them from Canada, and 1 from Great Britain. We ended up hiring the person from Great Britain, who also happens to be a Nigerian of Nigerian heritage, added tremendously to the diversity of our organization, and taught me a lesson about making assumptions about our ability to reflect our community in a meaningful way. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share our work at the YMCA on diversity and social inclusion. I would welcome all of you to accept the same challenge to reflect the communities that we serve.
Merci infiniment, M. Hayden. C'est un plaisir de vous accueillir. Mesdames, Messieurs, c'est avec joie que je vous annonce votre pause du matin. It's now time for your break of the morning. Coffee will be served at the same place as yesterday on the 4th floor. Alors, dans le foyer du niveau 400. Please be back in the same room 11:45, please. Alors, on voudrait vous avoir ici à 11h moins quart exactement. So please be on time, everybody, and have a good coffee break. Merci et bonne pause café, mesdames, messieurs.